Whenever you put form into space, you create positive space and negative space, okay? And what that means is positive space would be where the form is. Like let's say I got a square, all right? Here's my design. This would be the positive space, that's the form. And all this around it all of a sudden becomes negative space. And that negative doesn't mean bad, it just means where there isn't a form. And that's kind of confusing because negative space tends to become its own form. For instance, right now it's pretty static. If I turn it up this way, this is kind of a bad example because it's a square. But for instance, the thing that comes to me is the optical illusion where it looks like a glass or something. I think this is it. See, okay, what's positive and what's negative? Obviously, this one, it looks like, this is hard to do looking in the camera. This looks like, the black part is positive, and over here it looks like the white space is positive. But then you look at it again, and oh, it's two faces. So that's kind of, whenever you understand these concepts, you can play around with that positive and negative space. Another pretty famous example, I don't know if you guys have heard of this, the FedEx logo. And this is why good designers get paid millions of dollars to design, or thousands of dollars to design a good logo. FedEx looks like a relatively normal logo, but when you look at it, the negative space between the E and the X turns into what? Turns into an arrow. So what that gives you is, it goes along with the whole idea of FedEx getting your package there fast. And that's genius. I don't know if that was a happy accident or if they planned it. I'd like to think they planned it. But so you got to always be aware of that positive and negative space and how you can use that to your benefit. For example, let me show you. Let's see. Let's say a circle. We put a circle down here in the bottom. That's going to be it's going to be perceived totally differently with all this negative space around it than if I did a circle in the middle or up at the top or up at the bottom. Just the way that we perceive things, it's, you got to pay attention to that. And because of this, optical illusions kind of happen sometimes, whether by accident or not. There's a good example in the book. If a square and a triangle and a circle are all right next to each other and they're measured all exactly the same height, then they're going to look like they're not. One's going to look different, bigger than the other. So that's where you kind of have to use your eye, and if you really want them to appear the same, then one's going to have to be a little bit taller than the other. I think the triangle is going to have to be taller than the square, because your eyes kind of play a trick on you. And fonts are that way too. If you look at Times New Roman or Arial, pretty much any font, the curved letters like O's and S's are always a little bit taller than the rest of the letters, and you don't see that until you have a ruler out, and you're measuring them if you're a dork like I am. But you can see that, and so these just, this is ingrained into the industry, and you got to pay attention to that. Kinds of form, real quick. There are several basic kinds. They all do something different. The most basic ones are dot, the line, and the plane. And we're going to talk about those. There's, a lot I looked online, and, everybody has a different thing for elements of design and principles of design. But the thing is to think about elements are things like space, form, line, color, shape, texture, value, all that kind of stuff. And those are elements of design. Principles of design would be things like unity, balance, harmony, repetition, if you use a bunch of things to create rhythm, or emphasis, dominance, proportion, all these kinds of things. Those are more theoretical, I guess, or more, elements are like the tools, principles are the way you use the tools, I guess. Does that make sense? I don't know, that might be a lame metaphor. But anyway, so dot, line, and plane, basic kinds of form. And that can be broken down further. Dots and lines can be organic or geometric. A plane can be flat, it can be textured, it can be three-dimensional. So we'll kind of talk about that. A dot doesn't mean necessarily just a dot. It could be a clock or a person's face or anything, kind of like, basically it's a point of emphasis. It's a point of focused attention. So it could be many different things. And by itself, it is, draws attention to itself, and that's pretty much it. It's pretty static. But when I say static and dynamic, static means still and calm and serene, and dynamic is, full of energy and action and moving around. And I do it like, the way I describe it is this. This is pretty static. This is a little more dynamic, because what's it doing? Is it falling? Is it going up? What's going on here? It's just kind of sitting there. I don't know if that's kind of a weak metaphor too, but that'll give you the idea. So a dot is a point of focused attention. If you have one dot, it's pretty static. If you have several dots, you can do a whole lot of things. For instance, like this dot, go back to this. That's pretty static. It's there. If I do a bunch of other dots, like that, I've created something totally different. Maybe they're moving further away. Maybe they're coming towards you. And if I put them, at different intervals, like that, it's something else completely. And there's a lot of really good examples in the book that talk about that. Lines, kind of the same way, where you can create rhythm if you have a bunch of lines. Let's see. And the lines kind of serve a different purpose. Where dots are kind of the focus of attention, lines are more, they imply movement. They might lead your eye to something. They can lead the viewer's eye. They can also separate spaces. If you have a line in between two things, those will kind of become two separate spaces. So let's see. For instance, right here I have a line. Kind of lead. You want to look. You want to see what's on this end, what's on this end. Sorry, I'm having problems with this backwards camera thing. But then again, if I put a circle on each side, then we kind of have two spaces that have been separated by this line. So, and this is all what I've talked about so far is pretty geometric, pretty basic geometric shapes. However, they can also be organic shapes and dots. For example, this geometric line. This is more of an organic line, okay? And the way you can tell these things, geometric is generally, like geometry. You're thinking angular, hard geometric shapes with, flat edges or, like in a circle. The circle's a little different. We'll talk about that. Generally hard-edged, angular shapes. And those are not typically found that much in the natural world. Those are usually man-made, created things, perfect squares, perfect circles, all that kind of stuff. Organic is more, it's organic because it's what we see in the world around us. And, although if you look at a tree from way off in the distance, it might look like a circle on top of a rectangle or something. When you get up closer, there's all these other things going on, and there's no really perfect shapes. Everything's kind of asymmetrical and all this, and that's why asymmetrical design can be so much more interesting than perfect. Everything is symmetrical and that kind of stuff. Just because that's the world around us. So organic's kind of complex, irregular. Talking about the plane, you can have texture applied to a plane. You can give the illusion of 3D design, 3D space. And also texture, you don't really think about texture a lot in flat design, like on a page, but you should. One of the first things, well, maybe not one of the first things, but one of the first things I think about when I'm designing something is what kind of paper am I going to use? Am I going to use glossy paper? Am I going to use matte paper that has like it's called the tooth to it, with kind of a texture to the paper, or parchment, something like that? Are you going to emboss stuff onto your design where it kind of pops out at you? Are you going to varnish it where parts of it are shiny and parts of it are not? All these kind of things can create texture in a flat space, so that's interesting. So that's kind of a real short, talk about form and space. And what I want to do now, I'm not sure what your assignment's going to be. I'm thinking it's going to be some sketches examining these elements, but check the assignment page, and that'll be up there on Monday. And I guess that's it. All right.